Stop playing scientist, Bella, Maverick said, leaning across the family dinner table with that smirk that had always made my skin crawl. Your little battery hobby isn't a real business. You're basically playing with Legos in a lab coat. My mother laughed a sharp, brittle sound that cut through the clinking of silverware. Oh, don't be cruel, Maverick, she said, waving her hand dismissively. It keeps her busy. We all need hobbies. My father didn't even look up from his steak. Just find a real job soon. Isabella, he muttered. Or maybe Maverick can hire you as a secretary. You're organized enough for that. I looked at them. My brother, the visionary, who couldn't read a balance sheet. My parents, who treated his failures like genius and my successes like parlor tricks. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Understood, I said quietly. The next morning, at exactly 9 a.m., I opened my laptop and typed a single email to the managing partners at Apex Ventures. Subject: immediate capital withdrawal. Message: pull the $300 million from Maverick Motors. Effective immediately. But before we see how this empire crumbles, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. To understand why that email was a nuclear option, you have to go back 6 months to the launch of the Titan EV, the night Maverick officially became the family messiah. The venue was a converted warehouse in downtown Los Angeles, draped in black velvet and bathed in strobing blue lights. Champagne flowed like water. Reporters jostled for position near the stage. And there was Maverick, center stage, wearing a custom suit that cost more than my first car, basking in the applause as if he'd personally invented electricity. This vehicle represents the future, he boomed into the microphone, his voice echoing through the speakers. 500-mile range. Charging in under 20 minutes. We didn't just build a car, we built a revolution. The crowd roared. My parents, Sandra and Gary, stood in the front row, beaming so hard, I thought their faces might crack. Clapping until their hands turned red. Telling anyone who'd listen. That's our son. He's a genius. I stood in the shadows near the emergency exit, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. Security had already stopped me twice, asking to see my badge, because they assumed I was tech crew or catering staff. I didn't correct them. It was safer in the dark. From where I stood, I could see the entire charade perfectly. The car on stage was beautiful, sleek, and modern. But it was a shell. The reason it could drive 500 miles, the reason it could charge in 20 minutes, was sitting in a reinforced casing under the chassis, a solid-state battery pack with energy density that defied current market standards. My battery pack. My patent. Licensed through a shell company called Aria Energy, that nobody in that room, especially not my brother, knew I owned. Maverick thought he was a genius because he'd secured a licensing deal with some reclusive tech firm. He didn't know he was licensing technology from the sister he just called a hobbyist. I watched him soak up the adoration and felt that familiar heavy weight in my chest. It wasn't jealousy. It was exhaustion. The exhaustion of knowing the truth while everyone else celebrated a lie. 6 months earlier, Maverick Motors wasn't a revolution, it was a corpse. He'd burned through his initial seed funding on office aesthetics and influencer parties. He had suppliers threatening lawsuits and payroll checks bouncing. My parents called me in a panic, their voices trembling. He just needs a bridge, Bella, my dad said. He's so close. We put our retirement fund in. If this fails, we lose everything. I remember looking at my father's face during that video call. He looked old. Scared. He wasn't asking me for money because he thought I had it. He was just venting to the daughter who always listened. He didn't know I'd sold my first startup for $40 million when I was 22. He didn't know Aria Energy was valued in the billions. To him, I was just Bella, the quiet girl who liked science. But I couldn't let them starve. And as strange as it sounds, I couldn't let Maverick fail. Not then. I remembered a day when we were kids. Maybe 7 and 9. Some neighborhood bullies had knocked me down and stolen my bike. Maverick ran straight at them, fists flying, taking a beating to get my bike back. He wiped the blood off his lip and told me, "Don't worry, Bella. I got you." That memory was a ghost that haunted me. It was the reason I picked up the phone that night and called my wealth manager. Authorize the investment, I said, my voice flat. $300 million. Structure it through Apex Ventures. Complete anonymity. He can never know it's me. It was a burden I accepted. The silent sponsor. I became the invisible wallet, keeping the family fantasy alive. Hoping, maybe praying that if I gave him enough runway, he'd actually learn to fly. I told myself I was saving my parents. I told myself I was honoring the brother who used to protect me. But as I watched him on that stage, taking credit for my work, I realized I hadn't saved him. I just bought him a more expensive stage to perform on. The cracks started showing almost immediately after the check cleared. You'd think $300 million would buy some discipline. But for Maverick, it just bought more noise. 6-month post-investment. The quarterly reports from Apex Ventures were a disaster. The burn rate was astronomical. He wasn't spending on R&D or supply chain logistics. He was spending on brand activation. That meant parties. That meant flying Instagram models to Tulum for photo shoots with the car. That meant leasing a showroom in Beverly Hills that cost $50,000 a month just in rent. I tried to intervene not as the investor, but as his sister. I created a cover for myself, a technical consultant role that let me be in the building without raising questions about my wealth. I told him I was freelancing. He laughed and said, "Sure. Bella. I guess we can throw you a bone. Just don't touch anything important." One Tuesday afternoon, I walked into his office, a glass box suspended above the factory floor, designed to look like a command center. He was throwing foam basketballs into a hoop mounted on the wall, while his VP of marketing clapped. "Maverick," I said, keeping my voice level. "We need to talk about the thermal management system in the prototypes. The cooling loops aren't redundant enough. If a cell goes critical, you're looking at a cascade failure. The car could catch fire." He didn't even stop shooting baskets. "Relax. Bella, you're always so dramatic. The engineers said it's fine. The engineers are scared of you," I said. "They're cutting corners to meet your launch date. I ran the simulations. The risk is real. You need to delay the rollout and redesign the cooling manifold." He finally turned to look at me, his expression shifting from boredom to annoyance. "Delay the rollout. Do you know what that would do to our stock price? Do you know what the press would say? I know what they'd say if a family of 4 burns to death on the freeway." I shot back. He stood up and walked over until he was looming over me, an intimidation tactic he'd perfected in high school. "Look," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I know you like your little science projects. I know you think you're smart because you've read some textbooks. But this is the real world. This is big boy business. Stick to the lab. Bella. Let the people who actually understand strategy handle the decisions." "Okay," he patted me on the shoulder, a dismissive, patronizing pat. Like you'd give a dog that performed a trick. I stood there frozen, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. It wasn't just the rudeness, it was the absolute, blinding arrogance. He was dismissing the person who'd literally invented the technology he was selling. He was standing on a platform I'd built, paid for with my money, telling me I didn't understand the view. I walked out of his office without another word. The staff looked away as I passed, embarrassed for me. They saw a mousy sister getting scolded by the powerful CEO. They didn't see the architect walking away from a building she was about to condemn. The breaking point wasn't the money. It wasn't even the risk. It was the meeting in the boardroom 2 weeks later. I sat in the corner taking notes, while Maverick presented the future of energy to a potential retail partner. He had a slide deck up on the screen. Slide 4 showed a diagram of the solid-state cell structure. My design. "As you can see," Maverick said, pointing a laser at the screen. "We've achieved this density by utilizing a graphene-infused anode. It's a proprietary chemistry that I developed over the past year." I stopped writing. He couldn't spell graphene without spell check. But he kept going, weaving a tapestry of lies about his late nights in the lab, his eureka moments. He was stealing my intellectual soul in real time. And then he looked at me. "Bella," he said, "be a dear and fetch us some coffee. The partners look thirsty." The room went silent. The retail executives looked uncomfortable. I was sitting there with a laptop, clearly taking minutes. clearly working, and he'd reduced me to a waitress in a single sentence. I didn't get the coffee. I just stared at him. And in that moment, my mind drifted to something I'd read once about the Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive bias, where people with low ability at a task overestimate their competence. It comes from an inability to recognize their own incompetence. Maverick wasn't just lying, he believed his own hype. He genuinely thought that because he was the CEO, because he was charismatic, because he was a man, he understood the tech better than I did. Ignorance screams. I thought. Intelligence whispers. He was so loud, so confident in his stupidity, and I'd been so quiet in my expertise. I realized then that my silence hadn't been noble, it had been enabling. By hiding my power, I'd allowed his delusion to grow until it became dangerous. I wasn't protecting him anymore. I was feeding a monster. I looked at him, smiling at the executives. Completely unaware, he was standing on a trapdoor. I'm not getting coffee. Maverick, I said. He blinked, surprised by the defiance. Excuse me, I said. No. Get it yourself. He laughed nervously. Family, he said to the executives, rolling his eyes. Always so touchy. He moved on. But the air in the room had changed. The seed was planted, but the harvest came at dinner. That Sunday, the dinner from the beginning, my parents had cooked a roast and brought out an expensive bottle of wine. To Maverick, my dad toasted, raising his glass. Cover of Tech Monthly. The new king of EVs. Maverick basked in it. It's hard work, he said with false humility. Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Right. Then he turned to me. So, Bella, Mom says you're still tinkering with those battery cells in your apartment. It's a lab. Maverick. Not an apartment? Right. Right. The lab. He used air quotes. Look, I'm worried about you. You're 27. You don't have a career. You don't have a real job. You're just floating. I'm doing fine, I said, cutting into my potatoes. Fine. You're driving a 6-year-old Honda. You wear the same clothes every day. It's embarrassing. Honestly, when people ask what my sister does, I have to make stuff up because the truth is just sad. My mother chimed in. He's right. Honey, we just want to see you launch. Maybe you could work for Maverick. He needs a receptionist. It would be good for you to be around successful people. I don't need a receptionist, Maverick said, taking a sip of wine. I need people who understand business. Bella's a hobbyist. She likes playing pretend. Stop playing scientist. Bella, your little battery hobby isn't a real business. That was it. The final straw. The snap was audible in my head. I looked at my father, who was nodding in agreement. I looked at my mother, who was looking at me with pity. And I looked at Maverick smug, arrogant, completely blind. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I felt a strange, cold, calm wash over me. It was the clarity of a surgeon right before the first cut. Understood, I said. I finished my dinner. I helped clear the table. I kissed my mother on the cheek. I walked out to my Honda, sat in the driver's seat, and exhaled. Then I drove home. Walked into my high-tech, climate-controlled home office, the apartment they thought I lived in, and sat down at my desk. It was Monday morning now. 8 a.m. The email was drafted. Pull the 300 million. I hit send. But I didn't stop there. I opened a second window, the licensing agreement for the solid-state battery technology. Clause 14. Section B. The mismanagement and reputational risk clause. It gave the licensor me the right to revoke usage rights immediately if the licensee engaged in conduct that damaged the brand or failed to meet safety standards. I thought about the cooling loops he'd refused to fix. I thought about the hobbyist comment. I typed a formal notice of termination, effective immediately. Maverick Motors was barred from using, manufacturing, or selling any vehicle containing the Aria Energy solid-state cell. I hit send. This wasn't just pulling the money. This was pulling the heart out of his chest. I sat back and waited. It took exactly 42 minutes. My phone rang. Maverick. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. And again. Then a text. System error. Production line halted. Call me. Another text. Accounts frozen. What is happening? And finally Bella. I need you to come in. The computer systems are locked out. I think we've been hacked. You're good with computers. Fix it. I stared at the screen. He still didn't get it. He thought it was a glitch. He thought I was his IT support. I picked up my phone and typed a reply. I'll be there for the emergency board meeting at 10. He replied instantly. There is no board meeting. I need a technician. There is now. I typed. I drove to the office. But this time, I didn't park in the visitor lot. I pulled my Honda, which, ironically, I loved because it was reliable right up to the front entrance. I walked past the receptionist who usually ignored me. Good morning, Sarah. I said. Is the conference room open? She looked confused. Yeah. But Mr. Maverick is freaking out. I don't think you should go in there. It's okay. I said. I'm expected. I walked down the hallway. I could hear shouting from inside the boardroom. Maverick's voice. Find out who authorized this. Call the bank. Get Apex. Ventures on the line. I want heads on spikes. I pushed the heavy glass doors open. The room was chaos. Maverick was red-faced, screaming at his CFO. My parents were there too, sitting in the corner looking terrified. They must have rushed over when he called. When Maverick saw me, he stopped mid-shout and looked at me with pure disdain. Get out. Bella, he snapped. This is a crisis. I don't have time for you right now. We're waiting for the chairman of Apex Ventures to call in. I didn't leave. I walked past him, past the terrified executives, to the head of the table. The chair was empty. I pulled it out and sat down. I said, get out, Maverick yelled, stepping toward me. Are you deaf? This is for shareholders and investors only. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick file folder. I tossed it onto the mahogany table. It slid across the polished surface and stopped right in front of him. You're waiting for the owner of Apex Ventures, I said, my voice calm, but projecting effortlessly to the back of the room. You're looking at her. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than gravity. Maverick stared at me. He blinked once. Twice. What Apex Ventures? I said. Wholly owned subsidiary of Arya Energy, which is wholly owned by me. I authorized the $300 million injection 6 months ago to save you from bankruptcy. And this morning, I authorized the withdrawal because you're incompetent. That's not possible, he stammered. You're broke. You fix computers. I build infrastructure for Fortune 500 companies. I corrected. And I invent energy storage solutions. Speaking of which, I pointed to the second document in the file. That's a cease and desist order. The battery in your car, the one you claim to have invented, it's my patent. You were licensing it from a shell company I control. As of 8 a.m. this morning, that license is revoked. My father stood up, his face pale. Isabella, is this true? Ask your CFO. I said, gesturing to the man frantically typing on his laptop. The CFO looked up, his face gray. The wire transfer. It's verified. The recall account is registered to Isabella Henderson. And the patent holder is listed as I.H. Holdings. Maverick collapsed into a chair, looking like a puppet whose strings had been cut. You did this. You gave me the money. I tried to help you. I said. I tried to save you. I thought if I gave you a runway, you'd learn to fly. But you didn't learn. You just bought more expensive feathers. We're family, my mother cried out, finding her voice. How could you do this? You're destroying him. I'm not destroying him. I said. I'm stopping him from destroying everything else, including your retirement fund, which you invested without even asking me. I turned back to Maverick. You have a choice. You can resign as CEO immediately. Or I can let the withdrawal stand, pull the IP, and watch this company liquidate by Friday. If you resign, I'll keep the capital in. I'll restructure. I'll save the jobs of the 300 people who work here. But you are done. You can't do that. Maverick whispered. I'm the face of the company. You're a brand ambassador. I said. That's your new title. You'll cut ribbons. You'll smile for magazines. But you'll have zero operational authority. You won't sign checks. You won't touch engineering. You'll answer to the board. And the board is me. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in his life. He didn't see his little sister. He didn't see a hobbyist. He saw the person holding the lightning bolt. Fine. He rasped. Fine. The restructuring was brutal but efficient. I fired the marketing VP, who'd spent more time on parties than product. I promoted the lead engineer who'd tried to warn Maverick about the cooling loops. I brought in a real COO. My parents were removed from the payroll. Turns out Maverick had them listed as consultants while they did absolutely nothing. 6 months later, the company was profitable. The cars were safe. The hype had died down. But the sales were real. I stood on the factory floor one evening, listening to the hum of the assembly robots, a symphony of precision. Maverick walked by, giving a tour to some investors. He looked different. Keter. Humbled. He saw me, and stopped. He didn't sneer. He didn't make a joke. He just nodded a small, respectful gesture and kept walking. I walked out to the parking lot. The sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of violet and gold. I walked past the rows of gleaming Titans to my car. It wasn't a Titan. It was a custom prototype. I'd built myself a small, unassuming coupe with a powertrain that could outrun anything on the road. I thought about the difference between us. Maverick was a decorator. He wanted things to look good. He wanted the shine, the applause, the surface. I was an architect. I cared about the foundation. I cared about the load-bearing walls and the wiring hidden inside the drywall. You can paint a building gold, but if the foundation is rotten, it faults. If the foundation is steel, it stands forever, even if nobody notices the beams. I got into my car. I didn't need them to clap for me anymore. I didn't need their toast at dinner. I pressed the start button, and the engine hummed to life, a sound of pure, silent power. I drove out through the gate, leaving the noise behind, heading toward a future I had designed, built, and paid for myself. If you've ever been the architect while someone else took credit for the decoration, share this story, and tell me in the comments, are you building in silence? Or are you ready to make your move?